I had felt a strange unease in my stomach since the morning. Maybe it was the flu, or maybe just nerves.
Step up! Step up!
The shout of a TSA agent pulled me out of my thoughts. Security was moving slowly. Plastic bins slid along the belt. People nervously emptied their pockets, placing their things into the trays, whispering arguments and searching for their documents.
Empty your pockets. Phone, keys, wallet in the bin, carry-on on the belt, shoes off. Let's go, let's go.
The irritated woman by the belt shouted. For most of my adult life, I had worked at one company as an IT consultant. It sounds like a stable, calm job. Nothing could be further from the truth. In my case, it meant constantly putting out fires for clients across different states. Whenever something broke and couldn't be fixed remotely, Jessie, my supervisor, would call me in a cold tone and tell me to pack, because my flight had already been booked. Usually, she would tell me 1 or 2 days in advance. One time, she called in the evening and told me I had a flight in the morning. She didn't care if my schedule was already packed. Whenever there was a trip, I had to work overtime, sometimes almost all night, just to catch up. The couple in front of me finished their check. I stepped up to the belt, taking off my belt as I did.
Laptops out, bins, everything out of your pockets, belts off, shoes off, phones, keys, everything in a bin. Keep it moving.
The TSA agent shouted, looking like a special forces instructor. Easy. I'm doing it. I muttered under my breath, placing my belt into the bin. I emptied my pockets, took off my shoes and jacket, and stepped into the scanner. I raised my hands, and it suddenly went off. I jumped as I felt a wave of heat rush through me. What did I forget? I took everything out, didn't I? I thought, standing barefoot on the cold platform.
Back pocket, into the bin, and back through the scanner.
I heard an irritated voice from behind the wall. I slipped my hand into my pants. Damn it. Some coins must have fallen out of my wallet. I'm really sorry. I'll just put them...
Move!
She cut me off, already irritated like a wasp. What an asshole, I thought, tossing the coins into the bin and stepping back into the scanner. This time, I got through without a problem. I grabbed my things and walked away, feeling the TSA agent's eyes on me. Night flight from Atlanta to Newark. A meeting first thing in the morning. The client reported an outage after a data migration. They pay the company millions of dollars a year, so they sent someone on site who would sit there and pretend everything could be fixed. Me. I arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson after dark, as always, just in time before departure. I stopped for a moment and leaned against the wall. I felt dizzy. I had barely slept the night before and hadn't eaten anything all day, trying to wrap up the most urgent tasks. I need coffee, I thought, and started looking for a place. I went with a black coffee, no sugar. For balance, I grabbed 2 Snickers bars. As I opened the candy bar, I noticed a young woman. Even though she wasn't unattractive, that wasn't what caught my attention. Something else did. Most people around her showed some kind of emotion. Some were annoyed, others sad, and some were smiling as they walked. She just stood there, completely still, lifeless, staring at one point. She was pale, her face completely blank. There was one more thing that caught my attention. She looked about 30, and yet she was wearing a backpack with a unicorn head sticking out of it. As I stood there watching her, eating the candy bar and sipping my coffee, she suddenly turned toward me and looked me straight in the eyes. Her gaze was empty, cold, and absent. I flinched and quickly looked away, spilling coffee on myself. Great. Karma for staring at people, I said, annoyed. Good thing I had brought a spare shirt. I sent Jessie a short message that I was already through security and we would be taking off soon. She expected updates, regardless of the time. She replied within a minute. Okay, client wants to see you at 8. I read it, scoffed, and put my phone away. No thank you, no safe flight. Typical Jessie, I thought, and headed toward boarding. I got on the plane with the rest of the passengers, squeezing past people blocking the aisle with their carry-ons. I had seat 14B middle, the perfect place to have no view and no comfort. I sat down, slid my bag under the seat, fastened my seatbelt, and started looking around the cabin to kill time. At one moment, a cold sweat ran down my back. The girl with the pink backpack walked onto the plane. Please don't sit anywhere near me, I prayed in my head, but she was clearly heading toward my row. When she reached row 12, I closed my eyes. I felt stupid for being caught watching her, but it wasn't just that. Something about her made my unease grow stronger. I opened my eyes 30 seconds later and looked around. She wasn't there. I glanced over my shoulder. Row 22C. She was sitting a few rows behind me on the other side of the aisle. The backpack rested on her lap, held by one arm. I felt a slight chill run down my neck. I told myself I was overreacting. Airports are full of weird people. Maybe she was just having a bad day, like me. And yet, something about her intrigued me enough that I kept glancing through the gap between the seats. She was almost completely still, not looking at her phone, not fixing her hair, not looking out the window. She just sat there staring at the seat in front of her. The flight attendant finished the safety instructions, and the plane slowly began to taxi. After a moment, I felt a strong acceleration, pushing me back into my seat, followed by the familiar sensation of lifting off the ground. Atlanta began to shrink. The lights dimmed, and shortly after, the seatbelt sign turned off. A low murmur filled the cabin. The woman by the window next to me fell asleep with a loud snore. The guy in front asked for water, and a few people got up, pushing their way toward the restroom. People. We just took off, I thought, holding my head. Light turbulence appeared. Even though I've been flying for years, it always gives me a knot in my stomach. I glanced to the left and saw the wing bending in the window. I knew it was normal, especially during turbulence, but looking at it still gave me chills. I glanced back at the girl with the backpack. She sat motionless, completely unaffected. Her head moved slightly with the small forces, but the rest of her body and her gaze were rigid. The captain's voice came through the intercom.
We've entered an area of light turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts.
I did. At that moment, the fear eased a little, and I felt the accumulated exhaustion of the last 2 days. My eyes started closing. I felt myself drifting into a calm state and fell asleep. It didn't last long. Suddenly, I felt a strong, blinding light on my eyelids. I opened my eyes and looked ahead to find the source. The idiot with the laptop in front of me had turned on a movie at full brightness. Damn, people really don't think? I said quietly. I tapped the seat in front of me and asked politely, "Excuse me, could you dim that? It's really bright in my eyes."
Fuck off, man.
He replied without even turning around. What an asshole, I thought, and pressed the call button. The light above me turned on, and a flight attendant approached.
How can I help you?
She asked with a wide smile. Sorry, but the guy in front of me is doing something on his laptop and it's really blinding me. I asked him to lower the brightness, but he refused. I said, staring at the seat in front of me. The flight attendant leaned toward the row in front.
Please dim your laptop. You're disturbing other passengers.
The man reluctantly lowered the brightness, muttering under his breath. Thank you, I said to the flight attendant, settling into my seat as comfortably as possible. About an hour had passed, so roughly halfway there. I couldn't wait to get there, take a shower, and go to sleep. I hoped Jessie had booked me a hotel near the airport this time, not like last time on the outskirts of the city. I stretched in my seat and felt a strange sense of unease, the same one I had felt since the morning, but stronger. I instinctively looked back and froze. The girl from seat 22C was starting to stand up, slowly putting on her backpack. She stood up and began walking down the aisle toward the front of the plane. Maybe she's going to the restroom, I thought nervously. But why did she put the backpack on? She walked slowly and stiffly, almost mechanically. Her movements were unsettling. I looked around. I wasn't the only one who noticed. People glanced at her and then quickly looked away. I kept staring. I couldn't take my eyes off her. When she passed me, I felt a strange cold. She was almost at the front when the cockpit door opened. One of the pilots was coming out, probably to use the restroom. A flight attendant stood by the cockpit entrance, blocking access. Suddenly, the woman with the unicorn backpack lunged forward, running straight at them. Her face showed pure animal fury. It looked like something inside her had received a signal to attack. I froze, my heart pounding like crazy. What the hell is happening? I thought, gripping the seat in front of me. She slammed full speed into the pilot, hitting the flight attendant with her shoulder, sending her flying to the side, her head hitting the first row of seats. The pilot, shocked and confused, was thrown backward into the cockpit. The door slammed shut behind them. A deadly silence filled the plane, and the air was thick with fear and panic. It lasted about 10 seconds, during which I felt tingling all over my body. There were 2 pilots inside. They should be able to handle her, I thought, staring at the cockpit door. Suddenly, a short scream of pain came from inside. I felt a strong jerk in my hips. Pressure hit my head, and my stomach jumped to my throat. The woman next to me was thrown out of her seat. Something heavy hit the ceiling behind us, and the laptop from the guy in front of me flew into the air, bouncing off the ceiling and hitting someone 2 rows behind me. The plane dropped harder, and the entire cabin exploded with screams. All loose objects and people without seatbelts were thrown into the air, pressed against the ceiling. The force felt like it was tearing me apart. I felt a snap in my neck, and all the blood rushed to my head. The engines roared, and the plane violently jerked upward. I bent forward, hitting my forehead against the seat in front of me. Everything that had been lifted now crashed down with force. It was accompanied by a horrible sound of muffled pain and the distinct cracking that makes your insides twist. The plane leveled out, and only quiet sobbing cut through the air. The intercom crackled. For a long moment, there was only static, which turned into heavy breathing. Suddenly, a hoarse female voice spoke.
We're almost there.
The intercom went silent. A shock ran through my battered body. I felt a heavy tension in my gut. I could hear passengers groaning in pain, rapid breathing, scattered prayers. A flight attendant on her knees tried to say something, holding her head, but her voice failed her. I stared at the cockpit door, feeling a tightness in my throat. Another surge hit. The plane turned so sharply to the right that entire rows of people and objects slammed to one side. The woman from 14C slammed into me, her face pressed against mine, digging her nails into my forearm and screaming into my ear.
We're going to die. It's over. We're going to die here.
Before going silent after being struck by a flying phone, the plane began dropping again violently, and the pressure started tearing at my eardrums. It felt like going down from the very top of King Dakar. Please, let this end, I said in a choked voice. The nose of the plane shot upward. I was slammed into the seat. My face felt heavy. My chest was being crushed under the force. I fought for every breath as everything around me began to blur. This roller coaster could mean two things. Either one of the pilots was still alive and fighting for control, or that lunatic was simply playing with us. Everything stabilized, and the cockpit door slowly began to open. The woman with the unicorn backpack stood in the aisle. She looked around the plane, carefully observing her work. Barely alive, I looked at her, and she looked at me. Straight into my eyes, a feeling of overwhelming dread and pressure washed over me. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she smiled broadly, without breaking eye contact. I felt like I was face to face with a starving predator. I froze. I couldn't move at all. The woman turned and went back into the cockpit. The plane tilted almost straight down. I felt my face distort, and all my insides were pressed into the seat. I knew there was no way to stabilize this flight anymore. We were diving down, and through all of it I couldn't stop thinking about the pink unicorn.